The morning my daughter-in-law told me I was a liability, I was holding a cup of coffee I'd brewed in the same percolator I'd used for 31 years. The kitchen smelled like it always did, a little like cedar, a little like the lavender I kept in a small dish near the window. I looked at her, and I didn't say a word. I just set the cup down very slowly, the way you do when you want your hands to stay steady. That was the beginning. Or rather, that was when I knew something had already been set in motion long before I understood it. I am 67 years old. I raised 2 children in this house, a craftsman on Birchwood Lane in Asheville, North Carolina, with a deep front porch and original hardwood floors that creak in 3 specific spots I know by heart. I taught high school English for 26 years. I managed every bill, every mortgage payment, every tax filing for my husband, Gerald, and for this family from the year we married until the year he passed, which was 4 years ago now. Nobody ever called me incompetent when there were forms that needed filling out or accounts that needed balancing. But grief does something strange to the people around you. Sometimes it makes them tender, and sometimes it makes them ambitious. My son, Derek, had always been the one I thought I understood best. He was quieter than his sister, more methodical. As a boy, he used to organize his baseball cards by year, by team, by condition. Everything had a system. I admired that about him. I still do, in a way, even after everything. A system is only as good as the person running it, and for a long time, I believed his system included me. His wife, Dana, was harder to read. She was pleasant in the way that certain people are pleasant efficiently, with purpose. She remembered my birthday, but always called 2 days after. She asked about my health, but moved past my answer before I finished giving it. I told myself this was just her manner. Gerald used to say I was too generous with my interpretations of people. He wasn't wrong. About 8 months after Gerald died, Derek started coming by more often. At first I was grateful. He'd fix things around the house, a gutter, a loose step on the back porch, the kitchen faucet that had been dripping since spring. He'd stay for dinner sometimes. Dana would come along occasionally, and she would compliment the house in a way I couldn't quite name. Not warmly, appraisingly, like she was walking through an open house. "This place is really something, Mom," she said one evening, running her hand along the mantel above the fireplace. "Original tile, right? They don't build them like this anymore." I said yes, the tile was original. Gerald and I had refinished it ourselves the summer Derek was born. She nodded, and she smiled, and she moved on to the next room. I didn't think much about it then. The calls started about a month after that. Derek, not Dana. He'd call on Tuesday evenings, always after dinner, always in that careful voice he used when he was working his way toward something. "How are you sleeping, Mom?" "Fine. I sleep fine." Because I read that sleep disruption is really common in women your age. After loss, especially. I told him I was sleeping 8 hours a night and waking up before my alarm, which was the truth. "That's good. That's really good. Are you keeping up with your doctor appointments?" I had been to the doctor twice in the last year. Once for my annual physical, once for a knee that had been stiff after a long walk. Both times I received a clean bill of health. I told Derek this. "Good. I just want to make sure you're being looked after." Looked after. That was the phrase. I turned it over in my mind after we hung up the way you turn over a rock to see what's underneath. By spring, the dynamic had shifted in a way I could feel, but couldn't yet prove. Dana began to include herself in conversations about the house, what it would cost to update the kitchen, whether the neighborhood was appreciating, what it would sell for in the current market. I hadn't mentioned selling. I had not once, in 4 years of widowhood, considered selling. This house was paid off. Gerald and I had made our last mortgage payment 11 years ago and celebrated with a bottle of wine we'd been saving. The idea of leaving it had never entered my mind as anything more than a passing, abstract thought. But I listened, and I started to pay closer attention. What I noticed over the following weeks was a pattern. Dana would mention the house. Derek would follow up with a concern about my situation. Then one of them would float an alternative, something gentle, something framed as an option rather than a plan. A smaller place, easier to maintain. One of those lovely retirement communities outside of town. Somewhere with community, they said, as if I had none. I have friends I've known for 40 years. I have a garden I've tended since 1989. I have a book club that meets every third Thursday, and a neighbor, Roberta, who has had a key to my house since Bill Clinton was president. I have community. I am, in fact, quite firmly embedded in one, but I didn't say any of this. I listened. I kept my face neutral and my voice warm, and I listened. The morning Dana told me I was a liability was a Saturday in late April. She and Derek had stopped by unannounced. They had taken to doing that, arriving without calling ahead, the way you do with someone who can't be trusted to prepare for a visit. I had been in the garden. I came inside with dirt on my knees and a handful of parsley, and there they were in my kitchen, Derek making coffee, and Dana already seated at my table. "We need to talk about something," Derek said. He had the coffee going, but he wasn't looking at me. I washed my hands. I dried them on the dish towel that hangs from the oven handle. I sat down across from Dana. "We've been doing a lot of thinking," she began. She had a folder. A manila folder, the kind with the little metal clasp at the top. She placed it on my table, as though it belonged there. I looked at the folder. I looked at her. "The house," she said, "is becoming difficult to manage. For someone in your position," I asked her what position that was. She glanced at Derek. He had taken the chair beside her. They were sitting on the same side of the table, across from me, which I noticed. "You're on your own," she said. "At your age. This is a big house for one person. The maintenance alone? I hire people for the maintenance," I said. "As I always have." "Right, but that's an expense. And if something happened to you, then it would happen," I said. "That is generally how things work." There was a pause. Derek cleared his throat. "Mom, we're worried about you. We've talked to a few people." "What people?" "And we think the most responsible thing, financially, would be to look at liquidating the property while the market is strong. You could move somewhere smaller, take the equity, and honestly, you'd be taken care of for the rest of your life." I heard the phrase "taken care of," and I felt something inside me go very quiet. Not angry, just quiet. The kind of quiet that is actually a decision being made. "You want me to sell my house?" I said. "We want you to be practical," Dana said. She opened the folder. Inside were papers, printed documents, several pages, with tabs marking the places for a signature. She had brought a pen. It was one of those heavy pens, the kind that are meant to feel significant. She slid it across the table toward me. "This is just an agreement giving Derek power of attorney over your financial decisions. It would allow us to move quickly if we find the right buyer." "You've already been looking," I said. She didn't answer. "You've already been looking," I said again, not as a question. Derek put his hand on the table, palm down, the way he used to do as a teenager when he wanted me to stop asking questions. "Mom, we're trying to help you." I looked at the pen. I looked at the papers. I looked at my son, who had sat across from me at this table for his entire life, who had eaten thousands of meals in this kitchen, who had learned to read in the living room 20 feet from where we were sitting. I pushed the pen back. "I'm going to need some time to look these over," I said. "There's really nothing complicated in there." "Then it won't take long," I said. Dana's smile tightened at the edges. "Mom, we've already spoken to someone about a listing." "Without my consent," I said. She blinked. "You listed my house," I said, "or spoke to someone about listing my house without my consent. Is that correct?" Derek spoke. It was just a conversation, Mom. Just to get a sense of a conversation about my house, I said. That I own. That is in my name. That I have lived in for 31 years. The kitchen was very quiet. The percolator made a small sound. I'll read the papers, I said again. They left. I stood at the kitchen window and watched their car pull out of the driveway. And then I stood there for a little longer, looking at the garden, at the peonies that were just starting to come up along the fence line. Then I went to my desk, opened my address book, the actual paper one, not a phone app, and I found the number for a woman named Patricia Holt. Patricia and I had been in the same book club for 11 years. What most people in the book club didn't know, because Patricia was not the kind of person who led with credentials, was that Patricia Holt was a retired estate attorney with 32 years of practice, 17 of which had been spent specializing in elder law and asset protection. We had talked about my situation once, briefly, over wine at a meeting in February, when I had mentioned, only half seriously, that Derek and Dana had been making noises about the house. If it ever becomes more than noise, she had said, you call me. It had become more than noise. Patricia answered on the second ring. I told her what had happened. I told her about the folder, the tabs, the pen, the listing conversation they'd already had, without telling me. I told her about the 8 months of careful phone calls and unannounced visits and comments about the house that had been building into something I could now see clearly. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Do you still have the documents they left? I looked at the folder on the table. Yes. Don't sign anything. Don't call Derek back until we've talked in person. Can you come in Monday morning? I said I could. Good. And Melanie, do you have any documentation of assets, accounts, the deed, any previous financial records in your name? I told her I had everything. I had kept every document for 31 years in a fireproof lockbox in my closet, organized by year. Gerald used to joke that I could reconstruct our entire financial history from memory. Perfect, Patricia said. And I could hear something in her voice, not pity, not alarm, something that sounded like satisfaction. Let's get to work. I will not try to describe everything that happened in the 2 weeks that followed, because some of it is still tender and some of it is legal business that is mine to keep. But I will tell you some of what I learned and some of what I did. Patricia brought in a colleague of hers, a man named Robert Ashby, a real estate attorney who had handled property disputes for decades. He was quiet and efficient, and he wore the same navy blazer every time I saw him. I liked him immediately. I also learned, through Patricia, that Derek and Dana had done more than have a conversation about a listing. They had met with a realtor 3 times. They had requested a property assessment. They had even, and this was the part that landed like a stone in still water, made inquiries at 2 different memory care facilities in the county places, where residents could be admitted if a family member with power of attorney determined it was appropriate. They had not found anything wrong with my memory. They had not had any doctor express concern about my capacity. They had simply been preparing, getting the infrastructure in place before I noticed it was there. Patricia explained what the power of attorney document would have actually meant. It was not limited, as such documents sometimes are, to specific decisions or a specific time period. It was broad, sweeping. It would have effectively handed Derek the ability to make financial decisions on my behalf without my ongoing consent, including the decision to sell my house. I sat in Patricia's office, and I looked at the document I had not signed, and I thought about the pen Dana had slid across my table, that heavy, significant pen, and I thought about how close I had come to picking it up. If I had been a different kind of woman, if I had been tired or lonely or frightened or any of the things they had been quietly implying I was, in those Tuesday phone calls, in those remarks about maintenance costs and being looked after. But I had not been any of those things. I had been paying attention. The morning I invited Derek and Dana over, 2 weeks after they had left their folder on my table, I made a point of calling ahead. I called at 8 in the morning. I told Derek that I had read the documents and I was ready to discuss them, and that he and Dana should come by at 11. He sounded relieved in a way that told me exactly how confident he had been. Patricia and Robert were at my house by 10:15. I made coffee and set out the cups. We sat in the living room, Patricia in the wingback chair near the fireplace, Robert on the settee, with his briefcase open beside him. I sat in my own chair, the one Gerald gave me for our 25th anniversary, a deep green armchair that I have spent more hours in than I can count. I was wearing the blue cardigan I always wear when I want to feel like myself. At 11:03, I heard the car in the driveway. Derek came through the front door first. He had been doing that coming in without knocking. I had noticed it for months and said nothing about it. Today, I had left the door unlocked specifically so he would continue the habit, so that he would walk in with that confidence he had been carrying since the project of managing my life had seemed within reach. He saw Patricia first, then Robert. He stopped walking. Dana was behind him. She stopped too. There was a moment, and I want to be precise about this because it is the moment I will carry with me for the rest of my life. There was a moment where my son looked from Patricia to Robert, to me, and his face moved through several expressions very quickly, and what settled there at the end was something I had not seen on him in a long time. Something that looked unmistakably like being caught. "Mom," he said. "Who are these people?" "These are my attorneys," I said. I kept my voice even. I kept my hands in my lap. "Patricia Holt, who specializes in estate and elder law, and Robert Ashby, who handles property matters. Please, sit down." They sat. Dana's folder was not with her today. Robert spoke first. He laid out, clearly and without theatrics, what the document Derek and Dana had brought to me would have legally allowed. He explained what it would not have allowed me to do. He used specific language, the kind of language that leaves no room for "we didn't mean it that way." He was very good at his job. Then Patricia spoke. She explained that I had, in the 2 weeks since their visit, taken several steps to protect my assets. She did not specify all of them that was intentional. Let them wonder about what they didn't know. What she did say was that I had reviewed all of my accounts, all of my property documents, and all of my legal arrangements, and that everything was now structured in a way that reflected my wishes clearly and was not subject to challenge. Derek looked at me. "Mom, we were trying to help you." "I know," I said. "I know you believe that. You don't need all of this. You don't need lawyers sitting in your living room." I let him finish. I waited. Then I said, "When you spoke to a realtor about my house without telling me, were you helping me?" He opened his mouth. "When you inquired about memory care facilities without any medical recommendation, without consulting me, without a single conversation, were you helping me then?" Dana looked at the floor. "I am 67 years old," I said. "I taught school for 26 years. I managed this family's finances for longer than you have been alive. I am not confused. I am not incapable. And I am not afraid of you." That last part surprised him. I could see it. "I am not angry with you," I continued. And this was the truest thing I said all morning. "I am disappointed in a way that will take me a long time to understand. But I am not afraid, and I am not selling this house. And I am not signing anything that gives either of you control over decisions that are mine to make. If that changes, if there comes a day when I genuinely need that kind of support, I will ask for it. I will choose the person I ask, and it will be because I trust them." The room was very quiet. Patricia had a single sheet of paper, which she passed to Derek. It was a formal notice written carefully in the restrained language of legal documents, indicating that any further contact with third parties regarding my property, my finances, or my personal care made without my explicit written consent, would be addressed through appropriate legal channels. Derek took the paper. He held it the way people hold things they don't know what to do with. "We should go," Dana said. Her voice was flat. She stood up, and I noticed she didn't look at my house the same way she had looked at it on those previous visits. She just looked at the door. They left. Patricia stayed for another hour. We drank coffee, and she walked me through the remaining steps of what we'd put in place. A properly structured, durable power of attorney that named my longtime friend, Roberta, as my agent, with Patricia as a secondary, and which had been designed with the kind of specificity that left no room for misinterpretation. My will had been updated and was now held in Patricia's office. My accounts were structured clearly, beneficiaries designated, everything documented. "You handled that beautifully," Patricia said as she was leaving. I told her I'd had a good teacher. She laughed and squeezed my hand, and then she was gone, and I was standing in my own doorway, looking out at Birchwood Lane in the mid-morning quiet. Roberta came over that afternoon. She brought a casserole she hadn't told me she was making, because that is who Roberta is. We ate at the kitchen table, and I told her everything. And she listened the way, oh, listen, not waiting for her turn to speak, not rushing toward advice, just being there alongside the story as it moved through the air between us. "What happens now?" she asked. "With Derek." I told her I didn't know. I told her I hoped, in time, there could be something salvaged, that the person who had organized his baseball cards by year and condition was still somewhere inside the man who had walked into my house with a folder of documents meant to make him the manager of my life. That grief and marriage and financial pressure could do things to a person, could make ambition look, from the inside, like love. I didn't know if that was true. But I knew I was still his mother, and I knew what that meant and what it didn't mean. What it didn't mean was that I had to make myself smaller to accommodate what he wanted from me. What it didn't mean was that love required surrender. What it meant was that I would still answer the phone when he called, but I would answer it as myself, clear-eyed and grounded and entirely, irrevocably in charge of my own life. That evening, I went out to the garden as the light was going low and golden. The peonies along the fence were fully open now, heavy-headed and pink, and the lavender was just beginning to come up beside them. I had planted a small rosemary bush along the south wall the week before a new addition. I didn't have a reason for it beyond the fact that I wanted it there. I knelt down and pressed the soil around it with both hands. The house creaked behind me, the way old houses do, the way old bones do. I stayed there until the light was gone.